You are listening to the Cookbook Love podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 279.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. How is everybody doing today? Very excited to join you for another episode of the podcast, and also excited because behind the scenes, I have many plans for quarter one of this year and also things that will be happening in 2024 related to some webinars I'm teaching, some things that are going to happen with the Get Paid to Get Published program, and also my work as a registered dietitian. So I'll keep you updated on all of those things. So stay tuned. Next week, I'll have an announcement about a webinar I'm teaching at the end of the month about how to build your email list with a newsletter. And you're going to want to register for that if that is something that is going to be of interest to you. If you have a business or if you have a cookbook project in mind and you want to build your email list. So stay tuned for more information about that next week. But today, let's dive into our interview with Gerry Romano. Gerry is a retired publishing and communication consultant who lives in Virginia. She enjoyed an extensive career as a magazine editor and writer for nonprofit associations. But after she retired, Gerry began creative writing and self-published 3 books, a biography of her mother, her mother-in-law, and most recently, her own autobiography. Gerry is now embarking on a family cookbook project because Gerry loves cookbooks. But today on the podcast, I wanted to talk to a cookbook lover that does not necessarily love cooking. And how is that possible? How does someone like Gerry handle special occasions as a non-cook? And also, I would like for you to hear Gerry's advice about self-publishing and writing family books or cookbooks. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Gerry Romano. Hi, Gerry. Welcome to the Cookbook Love podcast.
Hi, I'm so excited to be meeting you and joining you on this podcast.
Yes, I'm excited too, and I'm thrilled to talk to you today all about your journey with recipes and cookbooks and writing. But before we dive in, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
All right. Well, I'm a proud native New Yorker, and I'm also a proud Georgia Bulldog. So I'll start by telling you how that happened. I grew up on Long Island in the 1960s and 70s with bakery shops in my neighborhood. And I learned early on that bakeries are happy places, which is why I went to work in one when I was 15. I did not learn how to bake. I was out front waiting on customers, and I learned why they lined up outside at 6 o'clock in the morning, even on cold New York winter mornings when the Bell Meadow Bakery opened. The name of the bakery was Bell Meadow Bakery. It was halfway between North Belmore, where I lived, and East Meadow, the next town over. So fresh breads, rolls, jelly donuts, crumb cakes, all of that obviously made people smile and want to line up and come inside. I went to the University of Georgia, go Dogs, to pursue a journalism degree. After graduation, I moved to Northern Virginia, and I've lived here for most of the past 43 years, working for nonprofit organizations as a magazine editor and writer. When I retired, I began focusing on creative writing, essays, poetry, things like that. But during the past 3 years, I self-published 3 books. The first 2 were biographies, first about my mother and then about my husband's mother. And more recently, I self-published my autobiography. I have a wonderful husband, Jeff Altman, and there are several terrific cooks and bakers on his side of the family, as well as on my side, which is why I decided to write a family cookbook with their favorite recipes. I'm calling it The Best of Both Sides, a celebration of Romano Altman recipes. It will also include a couple of recipes from good friends of the family. I plan to self-publish the book next year, just as I did with my 3 previous books. And I think it will bring a lot of joy to people. And I think it will be of interest to future generations of our family.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And a couple things just to, I have to say, I love the Go Dogs reference. I tend to, I'm a proud graduate of the University of Kentucky, so I'm all about the SEC. I think it's one of the best sports conferences, and also has always been a rival in football. And I don't know so much basketball. When I think of Georgia, I guess I don't always think of basketball. But anyway, in Kentucky, we have 2 sports. UK football, UK basketball. So we've always been a big sports family.
Yeah. Yeah. You
I think it's
mentioned that.
fun.
You mentioned that a lot in your podcast.
I know. And I mentioned it in my book because, I mean, literally growing up with my parents, if they said to any of us, if there's a game, I maybe have said this, we always knew what they meant. They were just talking about, it was either a UK football or basketball game. That's all they had to say. Yeah. So a lot of fun for that. So we met through the podcast, and you have been a listener, and you told me something about yourself though that intrigued me. And we made the decision for you to come on the show to talk about this because there are people that perhaps listen to this show like you that love recipes and cookbooks, but do not cook a lot.
Yes. And you mentioned to me that I remind you in that way of your Aunt Eileen. So yes. I love that connection.
Yes, 100%. She was a wonderful host. She loved to have people to her house. And we would go down, and she says she didn't like to cook, but, we would get there and there'd be a big table full of food. But her house was very clean. She was a nurse, but she loved to keep her house clean, and she did like to entertain. So it is, I guess as someone who loves cooking is really such a huge part of my life, and cookbooks obviously are too, but that you and I share a common bond through cookbooks, but it's not because of cooking.
Well, a lot of people, a lot of people, my mother was an amazing cook. And a lot of people will say to me, how could you not even like cooking? Your mother was such an amazing cook. But, her big wish for me was for me to have a happy life in whatever way made me happy. And I believe I have done so, but without, finding the, no pun intended, joy of cooking.
Exactly. So let's talk about what we have in common then with this is not the Cooking Love podcast, it's the Cookbook Love podcast, right? Yes. And there are things that you love about cookbooks, yes. And I do too. And I want to know from you what it is that you love about cookbooks, even though you don't cook a lot.
Well, I love the storytelling. I love when a cookbook has not only recipes, but it has stories to go with the recipes, comments about them, or memories of how the particular menu in which the food was used, what was used. And I love the pictures. They really help bring recipes alive for me. And I find it relaxing and uplifting to read cookbooks. And when I'm reading not just the stories, but the actual step-by-step recipes, I'm creating a picture in my mind of me going through the steps of creating that, cooking that food or baking that cupcake. And I know it sounds a little nutty, but I don't have to actually cook or bake to draw enjoyment from the images that come to mind. It also really deepens my appreciation for all of the foods that people cook for me. And I'm from a big family. My husband is from a big family. We frequently find ourselves with our relatives, especially on holidays, but we have a lot of other family events, birthdays and such. And when I am at my sister's house or my sister-in-law's house, or, when my mother-in-law was alive, when I was at her home or a cousin's home in Chicago, where my husband is from, there's so much food and it's so wonderful. And reading cookbooks and reading recipes really strengthens my appreciation for what they've done for me. Now, I love to entertain. I did get that from my mother. So we are, gathered as a family at my house a lot too. So what I will do is, now I can cook a few things, but I find it very stressful whenever I cook them. So I can cook my mother's baked shells and tomato sauce and meatballs. I can cook baked chicken. Those are probably the two things I can cook. And I can bake a cake. But I just find it stressful. So mostly when people come to my house, I bring in pizza, or we have a terrific barbecue place nearby. I'll bring in barbecue and macaroni and cheese, and everyone's really happy that Gerry didn't cook. And I have a lot of appetizers, and they are simple, but they are plentiful and delicious. And same thing with the desserts. I'll buy a lot of desserts and they're delicious. And I create games and we play games and we have a good time. So while I'm not a cook, I'm not a baker, I am very good at entertaining.
Yeah. And I think that, like you mentioned, regardless of where the food comes from, it is easy to imagine that there's a human behind most of what you spoke about. People working at the barbecue restaurant, people working at the bakery, creating the food. And so bringing that food into your house, it's still an extension of cooking from somewhere. It just doesn't happen to be done by you. And a lot of times it's kind of funny when I go to people's houses and they entertain me. They get concerned that, I'm having, like Maggie writes cookbooks and she cooks. And I'm always like, I really don't want people to worry about that, just to entertain me in the way that they enjoy entertaining. And if I came to your house, Gerry, and you had the things that you just mentioned, it would be a grand time. And I don't think we have to cook to entertain, or we have to cook to have people over. We certainly can do other things. And that doesn't preclude anybody from that. But the people that do love it, do actually love it, and people that don't, but don't let it stop you from sharing your home if you want to with other people and having them over. Because I think that that's really where the enjoyment comes from, is how it brings people together.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's neat. And I think, did your mom entertain a lot, or did?
Oh, yes. She loved it. Yeah. Any excuse for a party. We celebrated everything, no matter what happened. When you reported it to my mother, she would say, "Let's have a party." I always wanted to celebrate. Yeah.
And you probably did get that from her, because I think that for some people that's a big step, to open your door to your home, invite people in, have them come over, get cleaned up and get food in. But I think it's a great way to bring people together. And I think if it's a big gathering, I think it's enjoyable, even outside of taking everybody to a restaurant, just have it at your house.
Yeah. And I don't like to practice on people, but the few times that I tried to bake from scratch, for example, I bought Joy of Cooking about 10 years ago when I was 55 and I had stopped working. I thought, it's finally time to learn how to cook and bake. So I read it. I love just recently learning that you edited that edition of Joy of Cooking. I love that. And I did read in the acknowledgments page how much they appreciated your work. So as a writer and editor, I appreciated how much the authors appreciated you. But probably after I read the book, which I took with me on vacation. I mean, I lugged it on a plane to Vermont, going with my husband on a business trip, and read it on the plane, read it, in the hotel when we weren't doing something else. So I did not finish it there, but I do recall finishing it, not reading every recipe, but reading everything in the beginning and everything at the end and a lot of the recipes. And when I got home, I tried to bake a cake and from scratch, first time in my life. So I remember that it said to use cake flour. It was a basic, vanilla cake, yellow cake mix.
Yeah.
And it said to use cake flour. And I, just my eyes just glazed right over that. I just read flour. So I bought, the only brand I'd ever heard of was, all-purpose flour and all-purpose flour, I guess Pillsbury's. And I bought that and I used that, and the cake came out pretty dense. And when I served it to a few friends, I baked it because I was having a few friends over, and they're close friends. Otherwise, I would not have done this. So when I served it to a few friends and I said, I know it's a little dense. I wonder what happened. I read them the recipe. And one said, did you use cake flour? And I said, no. I mean, I thought that was, flour was flour for cake. So, live and learn. But I did not try that recipe with cake flour again for, I think ever again. So I more recently, inspired by wanting to write this cookbook, the family cookbook, I tried a couple of recipes. My mother-in-law just passed away a couple of months ago. So in honor of her, and she left behind a big recipe book. She loved to cook. She was like my mother in that way. The kitchen was their happy place. Uh-huh. So my mother-in-law's recipe for sour cream coffee cake was a big hit, always with me, with my husband, with, my brothers-in-law and their wives. So I thought I would try that. And I did bake that for my sister, and her husband and son were coming over for dinner in a couple of days. So I felt safe trying it out on them and on my husband, of course. And I thought it was really, really dry. And I realized they thought it was, goodish. They were, I think, being kind. But what I did was my mother-in-law's recipe called for sifting together the dry ingredients, because she wrote this a long time ago. But above that, it said to cream the butter. And then I guess what I did was sift the sugar in with the flour and the baking powder, because sugar is a dry ingredient, right? So I read the whole recipe straight through. So I sifted all the dry ingredients first to have that ready. And then I creamed the butter. And then I saw add sugar and then add eggs or whatever. And I was like, uh-oh. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. And I think that is something that you would just pick up and know just from, more baking, is that the first step usually is creaming the butter and sugar together. And so it's interesting, though, even in recipe writing for cookbook writers, and even in your mother-in-law writing that down, there's things that are probably implied that we might know that someone who wouldn't make a sour cream coffee cake all the time or cakes all the time might not know.
Yes.
And it just goes to, just for me as a cookbook writer, just to remember that there may be someone interacting with my recipe for the very first time, who's not only the first time for that recipe, but maybe even the first time for that type of a dish or that type of baked good. And why it's important to not skip any of the details that I may know just because I'm an experienced cook.
Yes.
So I think for cookbook writers that are listening, that's something that's hugely important. Even though we maybe feel like we're repeating things or we're being very detailed, I think for someone that's using it for the first time, it's important. And then family recipes, as you're going to note, those little things are not always included, because this was probably more like notes to herself about how to do this.
Yeah.
Or just like some of them could even be quite cryptic, actually.
So I I'm definitely going to include that recipe in the cookbook, but I will also include, my notes from my quote unquote testing the recipe, testing/following the recipe. And, to what you just said, my brother-in-law, John, when he was having a slice of the cake, my husband said, I remember it having a stronger cinnamon taste in it. And my brother-in-law said, well, while the recipe says 1 teaspoon or 1 tablespoon of cinnamon, my mother-in-law might have used a heaping tablespoon.
Exactly.
For all I know.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, because people will, modify them a little bit and make them their own. Do you plan to, for your family cookbook, are you going to go through the process of trying to cook all the recipes that you put in the book, or do you plan to just publish them as is?
No, I am not, because I do work intentionally every day on trying to have a happy day. And that would just be so much stress. I mean,
right.
But fortunately, everyone who's represented in the cookbook is alive and well, except for my mother-in-law and my mother. So with my mother-in-law's recipe, as I mentioned, I will include notes. And so that recipe will be more of a story about a daughter-in-law attempting to bake something that her mother-in-law always baked and was a big hit. And with my mother, also deceased, I have altered her recipe. It wasn't really a recipe. You know how old Italian mothers are. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. She described it to me once. I wrote it down. She described it to my nephew, Carl, once. He wrote it down, her recipe for meatballs. So Carl and I have already talked about this. We are going to put in the cookbook the recipe for baked ziti and for the tomato sauce and for the meatballs, the way we make them based on what my mother told us. But for everyone else, I did it. It's great that I'm starting the cookbook now because it's the holiday season. I actually sent out emails to everyone and followed up with them about in October about the holiday season is approaching. I know you will be cooking and baking your favorite recipes. So while you're doing that for Thanksgiving and Hanukkah and Christmas and New Year's, please choose your favorite recipe or two that you're going to actually make. So they'll be testing it as they are sending me these recipes because they'll be cooking them for the holidays. So for example, I already have a Hanukkah recipe from my sister-in-law, Karen. She baked it the other day and, took a photo, sent it to me. And it's a photo of her and my brother-in-law, Don, with the carrot pineapple souffle. And she sent me the recipe and I was able to ask her questions about what she had just done. So I feel like, all those family recipes will be tested by the cooks.
Yeah. And it's fresh in their mind if you get their notes on it, since they're doing it seasonally. And it's a perfect time to actually get the questions answered, because there's no time like the present when you've actually just done something. Better than asking about the carrot pineapple souffle in June, right?
Yes.
When
yes,
months have gone by and nobody really remembers exactly what they did.
Yes.
That's a great way to do it. And the recipes that they have notes about or have memories of, you can share that as well. How do you plan, and maybe you can help people who maybe are thinking about doing a family cookbook, a little bit about your process for getting recipes from your family members or having people contribute. What are you doing along those lines?
Well, I always start with an email because actually it's the same process as for writing the 2 family biographies and my autobiography. So a lot of family members and friends contributed to those 3 books to share their stories and also to review content I had written where I, needed to flesh it out a little bit more. Like when I was writing about my mother, she was a bridal dressmaker. So I interviewed some of her old customers who were still alive. So I start with an email. And then, of course, with the younger folks in my family, I have to text and say, I just sent you an email. Here's what it's about. please respond to my email, and then they will text me back with their response. So it is it is quite an organizational process to combine emails with text messages. I just try to make so when I ask for contributions after describing the context of the project that I'm working on, I try to make it as easy as possible for everyone, because I am asking them for something. And as excited as they may be about my project, it's not their priority. It's time consuming. Everyone's got their own thing going on. So I will even take information over the phone. I will take it in handwriting. I will take it in email. I will take it in text. And then what I'll do is combine it, ask my questions as I go along, just as I described to you, including, for example, with Karen's carrot pineapple souffle recipe. It called for butter, and I asked, was that salted or unsalted butter, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then I will ask for, any little story around the recipe. And if you can't think of a story, I generally have a story about every single person's cooking, because they're family members, and I'm also including a couple of good family friends. So I have been at everyone's table at some point. And even if my little story around their recipe is not about that particular recipe, it will be about, their cooking in general, or baking, or sharing a meal with them. And then once I finalize to my liking a person's contribution, I will show it to them, ask them to review it. I also ask everyone to review any photos I want to use, because I won't name names, but some members of the family, just like me, could be a little vain, and it's like, no, I don't like the picture of me, that kind of thing. Again, a large chunk of my family and Jeff's family is local. So I take a lot of photos on my phone, but wherever I go. So I've got a lot of photos. So I'll get sign off on each contributor's segment and put it all together. I will be writing. I love the preface of your Kentucky Fresh cookbook.
Oh, yeah.
And I love how it gives background that leads up to the development of your book, and it helps us get to know the author, and really helps the cookbook come alive. So I'm writing an introduction like that, and then I'll also be writing an acknowledgments page. I think it's really important to thank contributors in a real genuine way. I sometimes, with my autobiography and with my biography about my mother-in-law, I actually included photos on the acknowledgement page. I know you love acknowledgements, because your acknowledgements section is,
they go on. But it's funny you mentioned my Kentucky Fresh cookbook. I said to my husband, I was talking to my husband the other day about people cooking, not needing to cook, drudgery of cooking out of necessity. And I said, do you remember reading the intro? I said to Warren, do you remember reading the introduction to my cookbook? He's like, not really. I said, well, I think I want to read it again, because I still firmly, the way I wrote that and what I believe to be true is just, it's the same thing. And the acknowledgments, I read all of them. I'm like, that is the truth. That is the way I felt when I finished this book.
Yes.
There were so many people that inspired me and were part of my life at that time. Even if they didn't contribute necessarily to the cookbook, they were part of my life and part of what was going on. And that's what that book was about. And I just said, I don't care what the publisher says about the acknowledgments. I'm going to pour my heart out here, because so many people that just made such a huge difference.
Yes.
Yeah. And they didn't say, oh, you can't put that in, or you need to shorten that. I would have taken a recipe out before I probably did that. I would have skipped something in the cookbook. I think people that contribute, people, first of all, they do like to see their name in a book.
Yes.
I think it's great. And if they helped contribute, they should get acknowledgement.
And you put it in the beginning of your book.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I saw acknowledgments in the beginning of the book. So that's really special. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely, thank people, help them along the way. Don't show anyone content that you don't want their opinion on, or you're wasting their time and they could get irritated if you don't make a change that they suggest. My husband read all 3 books in total in manuscript form, and he was the only one. Except for the book about my mother-in-law. My 2 brothers-in-laws and their wives also read the entire manuscript because it's their mother,
Yeah. And you want to be sure, of course, it's as accurate as you can get
Yeah.
it, not being a member of the family.
But when my husband reads content that, he did not contribute, that he'll give me comments, and sometimes I listen and sometimes I don't. But I can count on him to have no hard feelings. So that's important. Just, don't waste anyone's time, and don't show content to anyone whose comments you don't really want to hear.
That's right. If you're asking for editing or comments, be prepared to get it, hopefully. And that's when the thick skin has to come on a little bit sometimes, because usually, most of the time, it's in good spirit. They're doing it to help you make your project better. It's not, any kind of a personal thing.
Right.
And with editing, I think that's something that's always, and I'm sure as an editor, that it's important for people to remember that editing it serves to make things better, and our editors are our friends. I always had that approach with things.
Well, and that's an important point too, about, especially if you're self-publishing, as I have done. I have the skills to self-publish because I had a 30-year career in publishing. And most of those years, I was the editor-in-chief of a magazine. So I was over design, including, having control over the editorial content. But I think it's important to know what you don't know. And that's okay. Know the skills that you have. And if you are not going to quickly go out and acquire the skills that you don't have, get the right people to assist you. And certainly with traditional publishing, where the publisher will do all of the steps and pay for all of the steps, I paid for everything with my books. Now, I was only printing 100 copies of each. And I was, happy to do it. I was giving the books out as gifts. It was just what was meaningful to me. So just sit and think about what's meaningful to you, what's doable to you. And if you want to sell your cookbook, which I won't be doing, you most likely do want to seek out a contract with a traditional publisher. That wasn't something.
And if you don't want to have a traditional publisher, it needs to really be seen as almost like creating a product, having a business model with it, and really taking seriously the whole editing, design, printing, and as something that you're going to sell to people as a product. You want it to be the best that it possibly can be, and putting your time, energy, and resources into that will pay off in the end for someone who wants to make it, a product in their business. So the editing part is huge. It's extremely important, and it can't be rushed. I just did a call today for people who want to or have questions about cookbook publishing. And I think you probably know this: editing and writing books, it's not fast. It takes time. And the editing is a huge part of that. Letting it go to someone else to read it and giving them the time it deserves for them to review it and look at it. Now, in the magazine business, though, I'm sure some of the turnaround times had to be fast. You're on deadline. You have a project timeline to meet.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will say also in self-publishing my books, I hired a graphic artist. My very good friend from college, Julie Hancock, who studied design at Georgia, as a gift to me, did the master design of my first book. Nice. And And then and she gave me permission to use that master design for, any future books. So I used it for all three. So she is a professional designer. And then I hired a very talented graphic artist and paid for her to execute Julie's design. And I did that, 3 times.
Yeah.
So I had fast turnarounds with self-publishing because I had to consider her schedule. I wasn't the only project. My project wasn't the only one she had. She has a business. And so I made it a point to make myself available whenever it was a good time for the graphic artist to work with me on the execution, on the production. When I proofread as soon as I got pages from her, when it went to the printer. And then it's also good to set yourself a deadline anyway.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
we set a deadline up front that would work for both of us, 3 months out. And the books are each about 40 pages. So we're not talking about, tremendous novels, but all three have a lot of photos in them. So it's a lot of work, but it was 3 months out of the year when both of us could devote a significant amount of time to the project before sending it to the printer. And many times I worked on her schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you mentioned that also with your recipe contributors, is that we do need to make it somehow easy for them to communicate this recipe to us in the way that you're willing. You have emails preferred, but you do take it however they're willing to send it. If they send a photo of a recipe, like in writing, I'm sure a picture, you would probably take that also. Whatever makes it easy for them, because you're right, their priorities and yours are not always the same when we're working on a book project. And we have to just be open and flexible to however they get the recipes to come in. So if people are working on a family cookbook, that's a really important point to remember. And take them as they come in the way that they come. And and some people will have high desire to do it, but not very good on the execution part of it. And you'll just have to maybe if you get 8 out of 10, 80% of the people that, say they're going to contribute then sometimes you just have to go with that.
Yeah.
But I love that you try to make it easy for people. So I want to ask you a question about something when I think about cooking. I cooked a lot for enjoyment, but then raising a family, I really probably did it out of necessity too, because I didn't want to take my kids out to eat every night or order food in or whatever. Let's go back to a time when women didn't have a choice. And I always wonder, we're in the midst of we have an abundance of cookbooks. We're sitting here talking about cooking be a hobby, all this stuff that's fun. But thinking about women at that time where they really didn't have a choice about cooking, and that most of the food, acquiring it, whether it be from, livestock they had, chicken, cows, pigs, whatever they had, and the vegetables and things and the grains and the bread was all things that was labor that someone had to do in the home.
Oh, that sounds horrible to me. I'm so glad I was born when I was born.
So, but I know. And so I would have to imagine that at that time, though, that people were in both categories, maybe. Or do you think it all became labor that people didn't enjoy? I'm just kind of wondering out loud what you think about that.
Yeah. Well, my only experience would be thinking about my mother, and in the 60s when she was raising 3 kids. We were all born in the late 50s, and my mother, in the late 50s and in the 60s and early to mid 70s, before we all went off to college, was raising and feeding 3 children and a husband and a dog who she cooked for. Sometimes.
Did she really?
Oh God, yes. Yes.
That is so funny, because I thought cooking for our pets was like a 21st century thing.
Oh, no. Dog food was not good enough for Bougie.
Yes.
So our French poodle got beef stew and chicken. And when we went to Carvel's a big ice cream chain on Long Island, we had to bring back ice cream for Bougie, his own ice cream. But anyway, while she was doing that, she really was amazing. While she was doing that, she was working full time as a bridal dressmaker, as I mentioned.
Wow.
And she worked 5 days a week. And then Saturday was her day for, grocery shopping and things like that. And Sunday was her, day to rest, which meant cooking us, a really special meal. That was her rest day. So she, I'm sure it was drudgery I would guess that it was drudgery sometimes during the week to keep cooking. My mother did teach my sister how to cook. So from my recollection, which my sister, when she, listens to this, will probably question because she questions everything I remember, but she's the big sister, so she must be right. But my recollection is that my mother taught my sister how to cook, like all the basic things like roast beef and chicken and, macaroni, just everything. And then Luann would either get dinner started or she would help with dinner. And I would do all the cleanup afterwards. And
I see.
Yeah. So I think that those weekday meals were probably just, not fun for my mother. She fulfilled her responsibilities really well. A lot of times, Bougie had beef stew and we had Swanson's TV dinners.
Isn't that something? I always say, people, please just cook for yourself first before you cook for your dog. I just think that's such an interesting thing that Bougie would get the beef stew and you would get the TV dinner.
And what my mother would say to you, if you said that to her, is that dog never talked back to me.
Wow. That's interesting that she would say this. So let me ask you another question. So you have a mother working full-time on cooking for you all almost all the time. Did you hear her say things like, "Oh, I'm so busy. I don't like this. This isn't what," what was her attitude about it?
She was always busy, but she never complained.
I think it's so.
It was just
admirable.
her responsibility. She was fulfilling her responsibility as a mother and wife.
So admirable.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. She was amazing.
And sometimes I think that this all gets me to this way I think about like time. Like, yes, we maybe do have limited time. Your mother had limited time. But she did it. It doesn't have to be the overarching narrative of our life, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And there are things that we have responsibilities for if we own a home, if we raising children, if we have a job, that we're working full time, we do have responsibilities. And with our freedom comes that responsibility, but responsibility doesn't always have to feel so heavy, I guess is what I'm saying. I think there can be joy in it. I heard you say earlier, you try to have a happy day when you wake up. And I think that's a wonderful way to look at the way we spend this next 24 hours.
Yes.
Because why not?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I'm different from my mother in that way because I do know that her children and her husband and her family brought her joy, and her dog brought her joy. Yeah. I know that.
What's the dog's name again? What'd you say it is? Was Bougie?
Bougie.
Bougie.
Yeah. His father's
so sweet.
His father's name was Boo Boo and his mother's name was Gigi. So my mother was so clever. She named him Bougie. But her career brought her so much joy, especially when she was designing and making wedding gowns for her children, for my brother's wife and for me and for my sister and then all of her customers. So I know that she had a lot of joy in her life, but she would never, for example, I don't believe she would, for example, wake up in the morning and say, I am going to intentionally make this a happy day. I think if I said that to her now, if she were still alive, I think she'd say, what are you, some kind of privileged character? And I do.
Yeah, but
And if she knew that I had two times during the day that I call Gerry time, and they are, a couple of hours blocked out, one in the morning and one in late afternoon before dinner, when I'm in the kitchen, which is where my desk is, and I'm writing or I'm reading or I'm, dancing around the kitchen, singing, whatever I'm doing, I want to be alone. And I call it
yeah.
Gerry time. And my husband respects that and he stays out of the kitchen. I think my mother would be horrified if she knew that I called anytime Gerry time and didn't want my husband around.
Well, when she was your age, though, and her children were gone, was she still making wedding dresses?
Oh, well, by that time, she stopped designing them from scratch, and she was doing all alterations unless a family member was getting married.
Okay, and
So,
then she would go
yes.
back to making the dresses.
But she had she had a full-time, got up at 5 a.m, came home, before dinner, 5 day a week career, even after we went off to college as a seamstress.
Wow.
And she did that until she was 85. Now, when which is unbelievable that she could still sew and wait on, serve customers and things like that at 85. But she did cut back on her hours, I would say, after she turned 75.
Yeah. Well, I think about this too, though. And even if we don't have time for Gerry time, I think there has to be some sort of animating emotion in our life that does help us to face responsibilities in good times and bad with something that's, it adds the depth to whoever we are and to whatever we are. And even in the midst of, cooking and working full time, raising children, I think that animating principle can be something that we just do what we have to do. And cooking for her sounds like something she obviously did a lot of, because you're putting recipe book out, with her recipes in it. The other thing that reminds me of too, though, is I don't think cookbooks weren't as readily available. They maybe had one or two that they used a lot, or they would get recipes from friends or family, or maybe someone at work, brought something in. People traded recipes a lot. But I think it's neat that even in the midst of that, you have enough that she did. My mom cooked all the time. The family of 10, she did not work outside the home. And you know how many recipes she probably has written down, Gerry? 5, maybe.
Now, I will say, though, that, I mentioned earlier that the kitchen was my mother's happy place. That was when she was cooking for special occasions, which, again,
not the day-to-day.
We had a lot of special occasions. She loved cooking for holidays and entertaining.
Do you think it's because it was different? Like she got to cook different things then? It wasn't just like the routine of, the weekday.
Yeah, perhaps. And also because she was so great at it, people would come to our house and they would just eat so much food and praise her for that. So she got a lot of positive feedback from that. And she could just see how much love she was spreading through her cooking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people that really do enjoy it, and they do think of it that way. It is a way to love people and care about people. But you don't have to be a cook to love and care about people. Obviously, you can do that in a lot of different ways. And that's the neat thing about you offering to people to come to your home and entertaining and making up games and having people get together is an equal source of, sharing love with people. And also the barbecue restaurant and everybody that you buy food from benefits as well. So it's just a fascinating conversation about, this whole concept of our kitchens and cooking and what it meant years ago and what it means now and what it means to different people and what books mean. And so I really appreciate your willingness, to talk about all this, because it's a whole different way of looking at things. Yeah. Yeah. So as you're, we're wrapping up here. One thing I like to talk about, of course, because it's Cookbook Love Podcast, is if you have any favorite cookbooks, even though you maybe aren't a cook, any books that you really have always inspired you, or any books that you would like to share. A lot of times I use this as a time for discovering new books for other people, and I'd love to
Yes.
hear your thoughts about that.
Well, my all-time favorite is Home Cooking by Laurie Colwin. I loved all of her novels, and unfortunately, she passed away, I believe, in her late 40s, many years ago. But in the late 80s, she wrote this cookbook, Home Cooking. And it's got wonderful, witty, educational, just terrific stories to go with her recipes. And I was just charmed when I read Ann Hood's book, Kitchen Yarns, because I was enjoying it. Similar format to Laurie Colwin's cookbook, where it's essays to go with the recipes. But I learned in the final chapter of Ann Hood's book that she too loved Laurie Colwin, and she wrote a whole chapter about Laurie, and included Laurie's tomato pie recipe. And
Nice.
I'll just mention two more. The Cat Lover's Cookbook. I do not cook for my cat, Fernando, from this cookbook, but I do. I get a kick out of it. My sister-in-law, Diane, gave that to me because she knows I love cats. And a cookbook that my mother gave me in 1969 when I was 11, the Teenager's Menu Cookbook by Charlotte Adams. It's a treasure, and especially since it, helps me remember my mother.
Yes, it's very sweet. Well, those are wonderful. Laurie Colwin's book, as far as the number of times I've asked this question of my guests, and it might be one of the winners for the one that I've had people mention perhaps the most often. So if you're listening and you haven't bought this book, you can still buy, I'm sure, used copies that might even still be in print. It is worth it to add it to your collection. And it is a read. It's nice to read. You can cook from it, but there's just something about the way that she told her stories. And I love that you have a cat lover's cookbook. I have a cat, I maybe have mentioned him on the podcast. He's actually laying on my desk right now. And I wonder what Virgil would think if I decided to cook dinner for him like your mother did for Bougie. He's happy with, he gets a little hard and soft food, but I think the whole pet cooking conversation it's probably a topic for a whole nother podcast, because I'm sure I would love to know how many cookbooks there are for like pet food.
Yeah.
And you can mail order, and have people deliver like fresh food for your pets, to your door.
Well, you're giving me an idea for another little special segment in the family cookbook. I need to write about what my mother cooked for Bougie. Exactly.
And if the family doesn't know that she did, they need to know that she did, because it's sweet, and it's very fascinating that even in the midst of all the other things she was doing, that was a priority.
Oh, yeah. And she did. Yeah. She also cooked chicken livers for him. And that is definitely something I will never be cooking.
Chicken livers are polarizing. People either, they love them or they hate them. And even in our family, I could, if I went to a restaurant and they made them, I wouldn't cook them at home, but I would consider buying them and having a couple, because I think they're really very tasty. I got that from my mom, I think. It's funny, when we would get our Thanksgiving turkey, has that little bag of giblets in it, and the liver would always be in there, but she never would cook that with her broth. She'd always like fry it up on the side, like this little special turkey liver, like delight thing. And there was just a few of us that would always like gather around when she cut it with the fork and knife and like have a bite of this turkey liver. And the others would just go running, screaming like the other direction. Like, why would we ever do that? So that's funny, that we talk about, chicken livers. All right. Well, I would love for you to maybe tell people maybe if they want to connect with a book, or do you have any of them for sale on Amazon, or if there's anywhere people can connect with you outside of the podcast?
No, I am not. I am not selling. But if anyone would like a copy, I do have extras. I also have the book in digital form, and I have the biography. I have my autobiography in digital form and my biography about my mother-in-law in digital form. And I would be happy to email those to anyone who's interested. And I can be reached on Facebook through, you can direct message me at Geraldine Romano.
Okay, very good. That's a great way for people to be able to get in touch with you. All right. Well, this has been a fun conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It's been a breath of fresh air to actually not talk about me as a cookbook writer or talk to other cookbook writers, but talk to people someone who actually, buys what we write, but has their whole own experience of cooking and sharing recipes. So it's just been a joy. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. This has been a great part of my happy day.
Yeah. And when you're finished with your family cookbook, let us know. And
I will
love to talk about it. Okay. Very good.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.